back to the Upper Deck stand because we've heard that there's something else new that's going to be coming out, and once again I've been joined by Tom. So Tom, tell us all about this range.
Well, Huntik is a new action property for 2009.
E con gli amuleti scopri il simbolo segreto. Combatti le forze del male.
It's already showing on Jetix here in the UK, and it will go live on CITV in July.
There's a great new show coming to Nicktoons called Huntik, Secrets and Seekers.
Yeah, not exactly a lot of people know or care about Huntik. Oh my god, this is the biggest piece of Yu-Gi-Oh! Rip-off shit I have ever seen.
If you want to be a fan of mine, you'll be a fan of something underground, cult, secret, in the know.
So it's a property that we're very excited about, and it's rated very well so far on Jetix. So
Excellent.
Fingers crossed.
Right, thanks so much for your time.
Our story begins in 2006 in an Italian animation studio called Rainbow S.p.A. The past few years have been particularly successful for the studio. In 2004, they had just debuted the first season of the Winx Club, a name that would become quite familiar to many worldwide in the future, and it debuted to excellent results. Season 2 came around and proved to be just as fruitful as the first. With this newfound success, the studio's next move was, and understandably so, to expand and to deliver a new product. The head of the studio, a man by the name of Eugenio Straffi, thus came up with an idea that he saw as a spiritual successor to one of their most successful endeavors thus far.
The idea behind the Huntik TV show is to bring back to the kids of today the flavor and the mysteries of the whole legend that make ourselves dream of big adventures when we were kids. Therefore, I thought that there was a space to go and explore all these fantastic adventures and myths and legends.
He sought to deliver an adventure that would captivate the viewer and bring magic, and for that, he and the studio needed considerable resources. This idea for a new show soon became an international venture. The animation was done in Italy.
Nella serie TV Huntik ho lavorato come supervisore al progetto, cominciando dal concept design dei personaggi assieme a Gino Straffi fino alla post-produzione. Passando dalla supervisione del character design, quella degli storyboard e quella dell'editing.
Some animation bits were also handed to Japan. A writer by the name of Sean Molyneux, who was also a collaborator in the writing process of the Winx Club, was tasked with creating a series bible for this venture. He was given a decent amount of freedom to flesh out the ideas of the plot, the main characters, their story arcs, and their pasts, and was responsible for the secondary characters pretty much top to bottom, and thus began the arduous process of creating this show. The team communicated through email, and animators consulted with Molyneux for guidance. The story editor for the show, Maurizio De Angelis, has explained that each screenplay was subject to countless changes, the time ranging from 2 to 3 weeks to 5 or 6 months. Eventually, their labor gained a concrete shape, and thus came the first fruits of their hard work.
Long before recorded time, humanity was faced with an evil of unimaginable power.
It doesn't matter where you go. The rules of life are always the same.
Sir, it's the boy. We found him.
Excellent. Now go. Catch the boy and recover that book.
And back then, it still wasn't known by the name it would eventually be known as.
The name Huntik came about after a series of thoughts and brainstorming, as we wanted to bring the feeling of Huntik, which is something old and legendary, mixed and combined with the idea of a search, of a hunt, of hunting for treasures.
It took the team around 3 years of writing and revisions to complete the first season, and when it was finally nearing its completion, the first ever air date was set. It was set to debut in the US on January 3rd of 2009 on CW for Kids, and on an Italian network Rai 2 on January 12th of the same year. And so came the momentous day. Huntik Seekers and Secrets indeed delivered an adventure, an interesting blend between treasure hunting and the classical fight between the good and evil forces. The show proved to be full of creativity and magic. So why has the Tale of Huntik been forgotten? Success at times can be quite difficult to define. What may be successful to one person might not be successful to the next. But why are we talking about success in the first place? Well, as it tends to happen, in certain scenarios success can be linked to how prolific something is. In a grander scale, the sphere of media relies on exposure. The more attention, the more successful something is considered to be. Movies, games, TV shows, and even me, I rely on that attention at least to some extent to gauge how successful this entire channel is. But it also isn't as clear-cut as that. There are other parameters to consider. For this video, I would like to highlight two ways of approaching success. The first is through a pragmatic, perhaps even a cynical lens. It is successful if it makes loads of money and loads of buzz, if it maintains its relevance. It does not necessarily matter whether that relevance is in a positive or a negative light either. The second is To understand the notion of relevance within the framework of this video and through the example of Huntik, we must first look at its contemporaries. Huntik, as a matter of fact, did not release into a vacuum. It had a place to occupy among many other titles within the sphere of entertainment. Huntik might have faded into obscurity, but there are shows from that time frame that still find their way into relevance to this day. The examples might be plenty, and some I might not even be aware of. But for now, let us turn our eyes to two examples in particular. These examples will display two primary ways in which these two TV shows still maintain their relevance and generate revenue. The first way such a TV show might maintain its relevance is through In a lot of ways, success can be seen as an indicator as to whether or not something brings value. A person is engaged with something and is willing to invest in something if that something brings some value. Now, there are a few ways as to how exactly that something can bring value. With TV shows, it is entertainment. Again, entertainment can be brought about in a lot of different ways. Certain intellectual properties happen to rely on that entertainment, at least part of it, to be brought by their merchandise, by the goods that they happen to sell to their consumers. For this, the perfect example is Bakugan. Bakugan is a kids' TV show that originally ran in English from 2008 till its conclusion in 2012. Now, if we look at it, what the show had going for it were the toys that came along with it. Bakugan toys are quite unique in their concept. Balls that can transform into small monsters, that was obviously quite cool. It was a novel idea for sure, and this idea garnered quite a lot of attention. So much attention that even The Simpsons felt compelled enough to reference it.
Battle card, digitate! Defense card, deflecto warp! Tsubaki, Goji Kick! You don't know Battle Balls? It's a Japanese card game based on a cartoon, based on an ancient religion, based on a candy bar. It makes Digimon look like Pokemon. What? Impossible!
It is important to note that it is not a TV show they are referencing, it is the toys they are referencing. Because again, the idea behind them was novel. By being unique and standing out, the toys managed to grab enough attention to make Bakugan a household name for at least some time. Everyone wanted to have them. Everyone wanted to try and put that little ball onto the closest metal surface they could find. It was cool and it was fun. The TV show itself, though, it seems was extremely cognizant of this. If we took a more pragmatic look through the eyes of a grown-up, the TV show itself is not much of high quality. The writing is not award-winning, and there isn't exactly much depth to it. You have a cast of characters that serve their function within the plot. You have certain characters that do have heavier themes attached to them, but you never dive deep into these topics. You never really dig into anything specific. They are there, and that is fine. The show instead turns its focus to where it matters, the asset that rakes in the most money, the Bakugans themselves. This can be seen in practically all levels within the fabric of the show. The plot of the show takes place because
my whole world changed one day when all these random cards started raining down everywhere. At first, they seemed harmless enough. We realized those cards weren't so harmless after all. They were packed with incredible powers from another world.
We have 6 main characters as well as plenty of others who come with their own unique Bakugans and their factions. We have evolutions of Bakugan as well as new Bakugan for main characters that can sometimes change from season to season. We also had new types of Bakugan introduced such as traps, new mechanics too, with some Bakugan being able to jump, some to spin, with some metal, some split in half and reattached to other Bakugan parts, thus fusing with another Bakugan. The pattern here is that the company behind the TV show knew how to spin the concept of Bakugan in plenty of ways to maximize their profits. They introduced these gimmicks to keep the formula fresh. Even the plots from episode to episode can be boiled down to a simple formula. Our protagonists, who have their trusty Bakugans, face a problem, which usually brings them an adversary, who also happens to have their Bakugan. Then they have a big bombastic fight. The heroes usually win, and the episode ends. Bakugan knows where its money is, and it chases that pot. It is also important to note that they also ventured out into other mediums. Stickers, clothing, accessories, even video games for various gaming systems. They went all in. Bakugan is simply cool enough to maintain its relevance. They even had a game that blended toys with cards that never really made sense, but nobody cared anyway since the toys were that good. And through the years after the first TV show ended, the show still found some practical ways to maintain the remembrance around it, as the toys themselves were spread far and wide. They were like relics of childhood to some, existing within attics concealed in boxes and tins to be rediscovered from time to time. Then the brand saw a revival through a second iteration of the TV show adapted to current sensibilities. It introduced a new variant of the same concept along with new gimmicks blended with a trading card game. And as the reboot went on, the trading card game was slowly abandoned. Because, well, that wasn't where their primary source of money was. Nowadays, the brand has moved on to the third iteration of Bakugan, introducing yet another variant to their original formula. It is hard to say whether it will be as prolific as the 2 iterations before, but what is clear is that the history so far has displayed Bakugan as being prolific enough to be deserving of the reboots and the attention. All of that because the controlling idea behind their merchandise was that novel. It brought entertainment value, and therefore it was successful. Now we may talk about another way to achieve success. That is through Another way that a TV show could provide value or entertainment to its viewers is through the strength of its writing. Not exactly physical or kinetic value, but one that stimulates a viewer mentally. The perfect example for this would be Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is a kids' TV show that originally aired in 2005 and saw its conclusion in 2008. This show, unlike Bakugan, did not exactly have a novel idea for a toy. It had a world-building idea that did help it stand out. That was through the bending of the traditional elements of nature. They also had the Avatar, a deity-like figure who had special abilities to bend all of the elements. But the show was cognizant that it did not have the fuel to originate a unique line of toys that would have some interesting gimmick. After all, bending is not something that can be turned into a toy and marketed to children. Then what does it do to stand out? It stands out through the quality of its writing. Of course, I do not really need to sing any more praises towards the show. The internet is full of deep analyses that dig into the show and its many layers, messages, and themes, which is where its success lies. As a kids' TV show, it managed to portray themes and topics in an intelligent way. It invested the time needed to round out its characters and establish a strong plot. Instead of leaving behind toys like relics to be reminders of itself, the show left something far better, in my opinion. It left lessons and wisdom that stuck with its viewers. It resonated with audiences in such a way that they still find themselves coming back to the show and revisiting it. While taking place in a fantasy world, it was still grounded enough to hold up in the eyes of both the child audience as well as the adults that once were the children who watched the show growing up. The show was able to cross that line, an impressive feat that not many kids' TV shows can be proud of. It is probably one of the reasons why we never saw a reboot or an adaptation to sensibilities of new generation of children like Bakugan, because what is presented within the show is quite universal. Every generation could probably find something to take away from it. And this type of success still generates massive interest in the franchise. It spawned the Avatar Studios, which is producing whole feature movies and new TV shows within the universe. It spawned extended media such as books as well as comics. Even if they found their success a decade or so ago in a fleeting market such as kids' television, it is clear that both Bakugan and Avatar franchises had something up their sleeves that helped them stick around. And from these examples listed, we can deduce two mechanisms as to how success can be achieved. Either you get your consumer invested into the brand experience on a physical level, one that is more leaning towards a short-term gain in attention due to the children growing out of the said brand, or you get your consumer invested into the brand experience on a psychological level, a level that is more leaning towards long-term gain in attention, a level that is capable of transcending the phase of childhood. Of course, these two mechanisms can certainly have their overlaps and differing expressions. That all depends on a multitude of circumstances that one can never fully quantify. But the Case of Huntik is quite interesting. That is because, for one, it targeted somewhere around the same generation of the children that the two other TV shows targeted. And two, while it is neither being rebooted nor heavily analyzed or revisited, it has traces of both the examples listed. It is a strange mix, one that ultimately led to the state it would be in the future.
So Tom, tell us all about this range.
Well, Huntik is a new action property for 2009. It's supported by, as you can see, quite a wide product portfolio.
So we have a kids TV show about explorers who seek out ancient trinkets and beings that are within them. How do we monetize it outside of the TV show itself? This is where the show faces a problem. It does not exactly have any idea within it that might be unique for this purpose. Unlike Bakugan, Huntik does not exactly have a novel idea to leverage. That is not to say that the show does not try to do something with the hand they are dealt. The people behind this TV show, I believe, were quite cognizant of this problem, as evidenced by this particular interview.
And there are also password cards in some of the booster packs, which give you downloadable content from huntik.com. So it's sort of one big brand experience.
These are the keywords here, the brand experience. Instead of having a single novel idea for toys and riffing off of it, they opt to search for their novelty, their selling point, in other areas in order to facilitate and sell an experience. So how do they choose to do so?
If you found this video, then you must be a seeker. Ready to learn about one of the most important tools available to the Foundation? The Huntik trading card game.
They opted to transform Huntik into a trading card game, a concept that was already popular, so it was quite a logical, albeit a misguided, choice. You see, stepping into the trading card scene meant competing with the games that were already quite famous and established. The whole premise of the characters within the show summoning monsters has already been compared to another famous franchise, Yu-Gi-Oh!
Oh my God, this is the biggest piece of Yu-Gi-Oh! Rip-off shit I have ever seen.
Therefore, a venture into the trading card sphere was already quite strained. The task to publish the game was taken up by Upper Deck, a company which eventually publishes the game in Europe and the United States in 2009. What the trading card game did was adapt the plot mechanic from the show itself. It centered around its players having to, just like the main characters of the show, complete missions and fight opponents. It involved only two players who fought against one another. It had hero cards, it had titan cards, spell cards, some of these concepts lifted from the show itself. It also had card sets available for purchase, promotional cards, as well as a whole holotome-inspired tin to store all of your trading card game necessities. As an idea, it certainly does add to the whole plan to facilitate a brand experience. On paper, it provides a mechanism for players to immerse themselves into the world of Huntik and to step into the shoes of the so-called seekers. That is how they sought to provide a unique selling point to consumers. As to how successfully it does that, well...
So why don't we start playing and complete some missions?
Hold up, look! Our new seekers need to learn a few rules of engagement first!
Now you have to remember that the target audience for this game is presumably the same as it is for the show. Kids around 10 to 12 years old. You would naturally think that the game would be catered towards that audience. I have to admit that I have personally not played the game when it was first released, for reasons we will discuss in just a moment, nor would I come to play it in the future. All I have of the game is the instruction video provided by Upper Deck. The video itself is 10 minutes long, and in those 10 minutes, it depicts only a single round of the game. The game is supposed to consist of 7 in total. Now, a real-life round would obviously not take as long, provided that both players participating in the game know the rules well enough. But the fact that the video consists completely of instructions and explanations really does say a lot about its accessibility. Where such card games as the original Bakugan excelled was their simplicity and accessibility. You have your gate cards, you have your Bakugans. The game consists of simply reading what is written written on the cards and counting the power of your Bakugan. You have the more powerful Bakugan and you win the round. There wasn't that steep of a learning curve. Kids would also just improvise the game if they didn't care enough for the rules, because the mechanisms behind the original Bakugan are that simple. Huntik, however, cannot boast its simplicity. They try to present it as this exciting experience.
Here we go. I move Amit Heart Eater forward and start a fight.
Not so fast there, Dante. This fight isn't going to be as easy as you think.
They want you to think that here is your opportunity to be a seeker you yearn to be. But the game is not only complicated, it also can run for quite a long time. Children do not really have that big of an attention span to sit down and strategize 10 moves ahead with their buddies in a play park. Hence why this trading card game in particular is an interesting beast. It appears to be quite mismatched with the audience it tries to cater to. That is why it is quite easy to understand why the game wouldn't exactly become a cult classic or a household name. The game simply fails to grasp the fact that while it is cool for the children to watch the main characters solve these puzzles, it can also be too hard and off-putting for the children themselves to try and strategize in a game that seems to be a tougher experience than what a TV show presents. Now, if the game is a bust, there are other avenues for Huntik to explore. Another quite natural and organic facet for them to further expand the brand experience is through Now this is where the fight for novelty is ultimately lost. You see, in the TV show, what made the Titans and the whole mechanic of amulets novel was that they were discovered by the Seekers. They were based upon interesting myths and legends, and the amulets were devices to invoke those said Titans. Now, there is no feasible way to replicate this experience of kids taking an amulet, shouting out a cool phrase, and a monster magically appearing next to them. You cannot really package that experience. That is not to say that they never tried to have a version of that. There existed toys that were shaped like amulets which housed Titan figurines, but that was as close as one could get to that mechanic. So they opted to have plastic figurines of some of the characters, as well as Titans and their amulets. The thing about these toys is that, unlike Bakugan, they did not provide a unique mechanic that would be cool or fun on their own. Because of that, they were defined by the value they had as part of the brand. Because they did not really do anything differently from other action figurines, their value was defined by the perceived value of the show. Another edge that Bakugan would have over Huntik is their toy integration with the card game. Huntik, however, had a trading card game and the toys exist isolated from one another, with little to no crossover between the two. That is not to say that it is a fault or a flaw. What Bakugan did, as we expressed before, was unique, and it was not easy to replicate. Huntik couldn't exactly blend the cards with metal to open up their toys, but the lack of such a unique mechanic certainly didn't help Huntik set itself apart from countless other toys stacked on the shelves. But for fans of the show, sure, having toys of their favorite TV show around would surely be amazing. Now, we have already established that toys from this era in some faraway future would become somewhat like relics, reminders of these TV shows, of these IPs, but they also could have been a way to get into IPs as well. Here I must make a confession. I have a bit of personal history with all of the examples mentioned so far within this video. I must tell you the story as to how specifically I became a fan of Bakugan and would go on to collect nearly 100 of the original series Bakugan. The story is fairly simple. When I was around 7 years old, I was simply walking with my parents down the mall, looked into one of the toy stores and saw Bakugan lined up. That was all I needed. I asked my parents to buy me a Bakugan, and thus I was hooked. I did not know how it worked when I first saw it. All I knew is that it looked interesting to me. But do you know what wasn't there? What didn't stand on the nearby shelf ready to be bought? The toys of Huntik. I believe that this aspect in particular is quite glossed over, since most of the coverage on the show online has come from English-speaking countries, aka USA or UK. Well, as you may have realized, I come from neither, but the country where I am from saw absolutely zero merchandising from Huntik. It always perplexed me because, as a kid, I would always want to have the Titans. I would always want to have the amulets. Hell, I would even go on to make them by myself in all the ways I could. That is how much I wanted to have at least a piece of the TV show in real life to play around with. This could be attributed to the prolificity of Huntik in a couple of ways. One of the things that children, me included, would do is, well, sometimes bring their toys to school or a playground, show it off to their peers, their friends, allow them to play with it, and thus spread the word. If anything, the word of mouth from children to other children might be the most potent force in the known universe. But interestingly, Huntik never had that going for it, not where it came from. And during that time, I lived in a few different countries. None of them had any traces of Huntik in stores. Trust me, I thoroughly checked. And it is not like where I am from was a neglected land that got forgot. We had Bakugan, we had Yu-Gi-Oh!, we even had Avatar: The Last Airbender merchandise. It is only Huntik that that would occupy the same time slots on television yet have no toys to show for it. The show came, and it would go, without leaving any physical trace, only memories that would fade and would eventually be forgotten. But it is only in the future that I would uncover a potential reason as to why Huntik had seemingly decided to skip an entire potential market and revenue. There is an interesting wrinkle in the story. Now, let's return a bit to the trading card game. As I have mentioned, it had sets of cards. The first, titled Secrets and Seekers, was released in February of 2009. The second, titled Legendary Saga, was released in June of the same year. The third, titled Omens and Legacies, was released in October of 2009. Now, the fourth, titled Labyrinth of Doom, was slated to be released in March of 2010, yet, as so it happens, it never saw the light of day. The reason is that the company behind them, Upper Deck, filed for bankruptcy. Now, Upper Deck is a company, and yes, it still exists, that specializes in things such as football cards, play cards, sometimes figurines, as in the case of Huntik. What happened was that back in 1991, Upper Deck created a division called Upper Deck Europe, which would be responsible for product distribution outside of the US in regions such as Europe and Asia. It was created specifically to sell toys, trading card games, and other collectibles that would appeal to the said regions. The emphasis here was less on sports-related products and more so on toys and games. By 2008, this division had broadened its horizons and reached more international regions than before, and thus was renamed into Upper Deck International. This was the name which eventually would come to aid in procuring the merchandise for Huntik. The details around the whole ordeal can be a bit muddy, but according to an article published by the Wall Street Journal back in 2012, what happened was that the Upper Deck International decided to sue its sister companies, Upper Deck California and Upper Deck Nevada, because they did a little whoopsie. Their American counterparts decided it was a good idea to allegedly counterfeit products, which allegedly led to Konami Digital Entertainment BV to terminate a really lucrative deal with Upper Deck International, and this allegedly led to the company's financial insolvency. This is coming based off of one article and a string of filings in the courts of Netherlands. But the signs of Upper Deck International struggling were there all the way back in 2010, first with the cancellation of the hunting card set, and also their own website, which is still up to this day, containing one last post dated to October of 2010. None of this was caused by Huntik per se, but it does contribute to the fact that Huntik merchandise was not as widespread. Of course, one could argue that there was some merchandise released. There would exist countless offerings of the very same merchandise on eBay, but primarily from the United States and the United Kingdom. But you see, the way it works for us non-English countries is that we are at least a few months behind, and that is very generous. The shows first have to be dubbed, so there is a bit of delay on both broadcasting as well as merchandising. And this is now my own theory and conjecture, so do not take the following as gospel. What I believe happened was that they released the initial batches to their primary markets, then they had the whole bankruptcy and couldn't make it in time to distribute the toys further, failing to supply both the initial markets and those they hadn't yet touched. Which circles us back to the same interview. You see, that interview was provided by Upper Deck International themselves, so when they eventually failed as a business, all of the ideas they had for this big brand experience were obviously forgotten. Perhaps this best explains why certain elements of Huntik would never truly catch on, because there was this whole external circumstance going against it. Upper Deck International wasn't the only company responsible for toys though. An Italian company, Panini, was distributing figurines and amulets during season 1, yet they would mostly focus on Italy in 2009 and on the United Kingdom in 2010. I must note that this piece of information comes from Huntik wikis, so therefore it might not be completely reliable, but it does show a pattern that seems so far to be true to my own experience. There is another medium Huntik would try out. Huntik did have a line of comics to accompany the whole brand experience. Once again, the concept is not in any way novel or new. Other franchises had branched out in similar ways before. According to Huntik Fandom Wiki, each issue consisted of a new comic book story accompanied by character profiles, features on a specific Titan type, fact files on real-life legends and historical locations in a place of mystery section, and several exclusive posters or gifts. It also allowed readers to send in their own Titan ideas, to which they artists would draw their idea, which would then be shown in the Your Own Titan section. Now, that all sounds fun and dandy, of course. The stories themselves were quite a nice addition to the stories presented on the TV show, albeit they were rather interesting in their continuity, because there were entire characters and plots that appeared in the comics, yet they were never touched upon or mentioned in the show. They exist in their own little world and expand the Huntik universe at the same time. But they, just like toys, were not even that well distributed. These comics were, if I am not mistaken, and of course correct me if I am wrong, exclusive to Italy. But within these considerations, there is a bit of a disconnect. Now, there is an interesting way in which Bakugan and Huntik overlap. You see, both of these shows have quite similar episode structures. We have our heroes, they go out, they do their thing, and then they encounter their foes. It breaks out into a big fight of the monsters. Like Bakugan, Huntik introduces new monsters all the time. This can be seen as a bit of a ploy to sell more toys. With Bakugan, it is pretty clear that this is what is happening. With Huntik, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but they do set up a basis for a certain marketability. Just like Bakugan, Huntik invests quite a lot of time in facilitating a cool atmosphere, a bombastic fight that displays the heroes in as cool of a way as possible. These are fertile ground for potential sales, grounds that Huntik, sadly, didn't exactly utilize. As we have already established, there is nothing particularly novel about what Huntik had put out in its merchandise, so they must establish a strong connection between the fan base and the brand. They have to provide an additional value to their merchandise. This of course comes through the quality of contents within the show. And now that we have explored the past events that may have contributed to the state Huntik would end up, we must also take a leap forwards. For many of us, the Huntik TV show was a part of our childhood, but where does it land now that we have become adults? Nowadays, there is a lot of talk about originality, or rather the lack thereof. The general outlook is that everything has already been done. Whatever unique idea you might believe you have, it most probably has already been thought up by someone else, written down, carried through, and eventually titled a trope. This brings us back to the idea of novelty, of standing out and having a unique selling point. For Huntik, toys and merchandise wasn't the route, but the controlling ideas behind the show itself were certainly a potent place for Huntik to start winning over people's attention. But we have established that originality, is that correct? Huntik 2 can be seen as unoriginal if broken down to its components. Using large monsters to fight, the good foundation versus the bad organization engaged in a secret conflict, magic powers that are hidden away from the common folk, teens becoming heroes, all myths being real. These on their own are not original, but it is the combination of these tropes that makes Huntik original, as well as how these creatives behind the show choose to breathe life into them. Because tropes on their own are just ideas and frameworks, blank canvases, but what usually makes them original is how the creatives interpret them. So now we may break down as to how Huntik in particular does it. The first step is the Titans, as you might have gathered so far, are the monsters of Huntik, these fantastical creatures that our heroes use to fight the forces of evil. Again, inherently, not the most unique idea, but Huntik does something unique. It combines this idea with motifs that can be found within our histories and myths, legends from all around the world. Now that admittedly is a brilliant idea. The myths and legends that already exist in our world are a source of wonder. It adds a bit of color to our perception of the world around us. Huntik saturates those colors in a way, by making it all real in their own world. Suddenly, historical figures become the so-called seekers, Huntik's terms for the people who seek out and have these titans and the powers. Thor, Count Dracula, and even Nostradamus become seekers in this world. Such mythological creatures as Fenrir and Golem become titans in the world of Huntik. Some famous stories of the past become clues for our seekers to crack whatever puzzle they are trying to unravel, and all of this is really fun to see. The show finds really interesting ways to use these stories and bring them into the show. That is not to say that absolutely all of these titans or seekers are plucked from history. The creators riff off of their inspirations and bring a lot of interesting ideas to the table as well. One of my personal favorite titans, Antediluvian according to Huntik Wiki, finds its name from the English name Antediluvian, which refers to a time before the biblical flood, and indirectly to vampires which were thought to originate during this time. The titan is inspired by Count Dracula, and the show is full of these little tidbits of history and random trivia. It is really obvious just how much care went into creating fighting the Titans. Not to mention the fact that the Titans also have their own categories, their own rankings within the holotome, their little icons and their amulets.
You found Springer. This Titan is skilled at solving complex puzzles and intricate traps.
For a kids' TV show, it really goes deep with its lore, and throughout the 2 seasons, Titans remain the element that is consistently inventive and simply fun. Another aspect that Huntik excels at is in Season 1 of Huntik, the main mechanism behind the plot and the reason the whole TV show takes place is because our main character, Locke Lambert, accidentally stumbles upon his father's journal, the father who had disappeared a long time ago. This sends him on the way towards Dante Vale, a character who later becomes a mentor to Locke, as well as to Sophie Castorwill, a classmate of Locke's. The small chain of events then serves as an entry into the secret magical world. Within this plot, Locke becomes a surrogate for the audience. He is just as inexperienced in this magical world as the viewer. You, along with him, are invited to experience all that the world of Huntik has to offer. You find out about the Huntik Foundation, people who seek out amulets and titans. They are the heroes of the story. They are headed by a man named
Metz. Metz, as in the leader of the Huntik Foundation?
But we also have our villains. You come to find out about the organization and a mysterious man by the name of the Professor.
He is one of the world's most powerful seekers. His collection of amulets and ancient artifacts is the largest in history. He manipulates heads of state as well as his own men with the skill to control minds.
Up until around episode 19, we see the team bond and build connections, train and travel the world on random missions. After a few missions of gaining experience and bonding, they stumble upon a spell that can fix Locke's father's journal.
You're going to be glad to hear this. Where's your father's journal? The wall you went through hid a coded inscription for a power to restore damaged objects. We can learn the power. We can fix your father's journal.
Yeah.
Afterwards, the journal of Ethan Lambert, Locke's father, becomes the primary plot device through which the show operates. It becomes a roadmap of sorts for our main heroes to follow. Admittedly, there are multiple ways in which this plot is clever. First, it is the way they twist the plot so that they make the whole journey worthwhile at the end. Locke discovers the journal, yes, but then it gets thrown into the water and partially destroyed, therefore they need to find a way to fix it. It is a simple obstacle, but it certainly is effective for a kids' TV show. And these sorts of complications lend themselves to quite interesting journeys across the world for our team. It is simply a nice touch that our characters find solutions in various locations, and those solutions feel earned. The viewer also gets to see interesting settings in the meantime, and that certainly lends to the overall sense of wonder. Second, the plot of Season 1 at least is incredibly airtight for a show that is meant to be for children. The undercurrent of Season 1 is the disappearance of Locke's father. It sounds like a simple search for a lost relative trope, but at the same time it is much bigger than that. As the season progresses, you find out how connected everything is. It begins with our main characters. You find out that the mentor character Dante Vale has a mentor of his own who he seeks to help. Locke Lambert wants to find his father. Sophie Castorwill wants to train and to discover her legacy. Zalia Moon might be the least connected to the overall endgame of the plot, but she had her own story in there, which was nice. Before the plotline of Ethan's disappearance comes to the front, the show keeps dropping hints that something bigger is afoot. You have the evil professor keep monologuing all evilly.
Tell me, Rasimov, have the legendary titans finally resurfaced?
They have.
Yes, I can feel it. It's very, very close. Only with these 3 legendary titans can I achieve my ultimate goal.
You see, at the end all of it comes together in an interesting way, as you find out that Dante's mentor and the current leader of Huntik, as well as Locke's father and the professor, used to be buddies who were looking for something called the legendary titans. This in one way or another tied all of the characters to the plot, and all of them had at least a bit of relevance to it. It is basic storytelling, but it makes Huntik that much more engaging, not to mention that the mystery surrounding the professor is quite well done. That is not to say that the plot of the show is perfect. It starts and it ends in really less than perfect writing. You see, the whole plot starts when Sophie and Locke discovered the amulet.
Hey, look at this.
But the whole plot is really propelled when Locke is then immediately attacked by the bad guys.
Trouble! Look out!
It doesn't exactly make sense as to why exactly they attacked right then, a random boy living in Venice, conveniently after he brought Sophie over and she was clumsy enough to break a fancy vase. It doesn't really make sense as to why Ethan would hide the journal in a very random place and then expect Locke to even find it. It doesn't exactly make sense as to why no one else from Huntik was looking for Ethan either. The last episode also pulls out the strangest deus ex machina. The show introduces these legendary titans as end-all be-all endgame, the most powerful beings there are.
That the legendary titans were too powerful for mankind. They were sealed under a deadly curse.
The so-called legendary titan of immortality shows up, the most OP thing in existence. And the solution that the protagonists come up with is to try and control them, all of these legendary titans, with a regular titan who apparently can just control even the legendary titans. And this titan was just handed to them too, basically on a platter.
The Professor is stronger than you think!
As we find out later on, it was done with an ulterior motive, but it still is not an elegant solution to this problem. I suppose one can equate this to the lion turtle showing up in Avatar: The Last Airbender pretty last minute and presenting a solution for Aang to deal with Ozai. Then comes around season 2. The plot of the season quite interestingly riffs off of the first. It begins with Locke and the team going out on a mission to find Locke's father. Locke, who is in the possession of a holotome that was tampered with by Rasimov, that creepy dude from season 1 with an accent, manages to talk with his father, who is apparently trapped in the Titan world of Huntik. Ethan proceeds to warn them of a threat that is coming.
I didn't cross over to run away from the Professor. I'm preparing for a much bigger threat to all mankind.
Worse than the organization?
So very much worse, son. An unimaginable force of darkness defeated by Lord Casterwell that now must be faced by his heir.
He also talks about Sophie.
You're a direct descendant of Casterwell himself, who brought the Titans to Earth to save all life. And you are the inheritor of his legacy.
Locke's dad, instead of his journal, this time around leaves the quatrains of Nostradamus. They then act as a plot device to get our characters from one place to another in order to prepare for whatever is coming. It follows the footsteps of the first in this way. But what this season also does, which I thought was cute, is that it has the characters revisit some of the locations and characters from the first season. And as the plot progresses, it explores the more mystic elements of Huntik lore. The Professor and the organization were really rather grounded in comparison to the villains this time around, ominously called the Nullifiers. With the Nullifiers, they really go deep into the whole lore surrounding the Casterwells, which was mentioned from time to time in season 1. Here, however, it really does take the center stage. Now, the plot itself really is not as personal as the first season. The antagonist, who would be revealed to be an old evil man called the Betrayer, is not really directly related to anyone from the team in any capacity. He is just a big bad guy that they seek to eliminate because he wants to do some really awful things. And the big twist this time around is that the Betrayer was steering our team in the direction he needed them to go through the holotome that the evil dude Rasimov hid for Locke to find. Overall, I wouldn't say that the plot of the season is in any way bad. It's serviceable. So here we have a TV show that is quite plot heavy for a kids TV show and has ideas within it that are really creative. That sounds good enough, right? In this way, it is similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Of course, Huntik had some plot conveniences that deserve more scrutiny than anything in Avatar, and the world building of both shows are really cool. So what is the root of Huntik's problems then? I should begin by saying that between me watching the show as a child and revisiting the show later on, there was a considerable gap. Perhaps you could even say that I was an entirely different person when I eventually revisited Huntik. Admittedly, revisiting it being older was quite a tough experience. It was difficult for me to rewatch Huntik at times. Of course, I adjusted and got used to it, but I didn't have the same experience with revisiting Avatar. It might sound somewhat like a stretch, but I do believe that this is because of the approach the two TV shows take towards their audience. Now, as we have already established, the audience of both these TV shows overlap to at least some extent. First, because they were both targeted towards similar age ranges, and second, because of the close proximity of their release date, they also targeted the same generation of children. Yet, they see their audiences differently. This is where we come to the concept of execution. The understanding of an audience can greatly affect and should affect the way something is executed. While we have already partially discussed it through the Titans and the plot itself, there is still room to analyze how everything is presented. Now, if we narrow down the intended audience, the audience, once again, is supposed supposed to be kids. What Avatar: The Last Airbender does is, well, treats the audience as equals. Even if the audience are presumably younger than the writers and have less life experience, the script surprisingly never assumes that the audience are incapable of understanding what is presented. It respects the audience and treats them on equal footing as adults. Huntik, however, does not do that. Perhaps for now it is hard to conceptualize what exactly this means, so to dissect this notion, let us begin with trust is probably one of the most important components of anything, really. Trust is an assumption that something fits some sort of a criteria, that something or someone is capable of something. Huntik, I believe, has very little trust in their audience. The show probably doesn't do it maliciously. There is an interesting tidbit that comes from an article from Italian Vanity Fair that is quite illuminating. As it is written in Wikipedia, when drafting the show's action sequences, the Huntik staff avoided violence that could be emulated by viewers. They preferred monster fights over human combat scenes, and instead of punches, the writers called for spheres of energy to be shown on screen. It may seem to be quite a reasonable chain of thought, but you can also look at it from another perspective. The staff behind Huntik didn't trust the audience to not emulate the violence. This sort of mentality of not trusting the audience can be seen in the script itself. You can see this at a macro level. Huntik does something not unusual for kids' TV shows. It tries to portray certain truths to its audience, certain teachable moments here and there. For example, here we have the 12th episode of the first season, where our team visits an island that happens to be controlled by a person named Greer, who is part of the rivals of the Huntik team, the organization. Our team of protagonists first assume that this is bad, because organization is also bad. But as they find out, the locals actually like the new status quo and Greer is actually interested in making the life better for the land. There is obviously a teachable moment in there somewhere, that here is a person who is on the opposing side, yet isn't bad at all. And oh, there is some ambiguity and cool stuff like that. But instead of allowing the audience to come to this conclusion, the show does this.
The character of an individual is more important than the group he belongs to.
I don't know what to say.
I do. Greer, it's time we resolved our differences without fighting.
Finish your mission and go.
The organization is rotten, but you're not, Greer.
The show takes the liberty of guiding the viewer towards the conclusion that they want for the viewer to come to. They spell it out in very obvious terms, and they do not have the trust that the audience will take away what they were intended to take away. Then we also have the micro level. In the first episode of Huntik, we have Locke flipping through the journal, and then this happens.
What I really want to know about is this journal. Seen it before?
Check the inside front cover.
What about it?
It's a common thing to write names there.
Now, this tidbit actually might be something that the child audience doesn't know, but it does stick out when we also have the instances of
sometimes honor can be found where you least expect it.
What's this?
It's an amulet with a titan inside, and it's already bonding with Locke.
Here we have examples where the show assumes that what they are presenting to the viewer might be too complicated to grasp. They keep explaining what is happening. They keep inserting these little comments that are supposed to guide the viewer through the viewer experience. If you have watched the show as a child, these might have simply flown under your radar. But if you are someone older, these things can certainly stick out. Because here you are, a person who is capable of thinking for themselves. And here is Huntik that tries to portray these topics, but it assumes an authoritative position of telling you how things are, what is the truth, instead of allowing you to take something away for yourself on your own. It can be simply patronizing. In a way, it may also shut down any discussion. I mean, the show says it itself, right?
Sometimes honor can be found where you least expect it.
This notion is inherently true. What else is there to debate or discuss? The show discussed it for you already. It is quite interesting how there are not a lot of discussions about the show in regards to character ethics, because there is not much of a discussion to be had. The show itself also, I feel as though, avoids discussing certain things. For this, let us delve deeper into Huntik admittedly has a cast of characters that have quite interesting backstories, but it does at times choose not to dig deep and remain shallow on some heavier themes. The main character, Locke, is involved with Huntik in the first place because his father has gone missing, and therefore we get to see his journey as he becomes powerful enough of a seeker to fulfill his wish of finding his father. He eventually does come to a sort of reunion with his father. In the first episode of second season, it goes down like this.
Dad, it's really you!
Look, it's a dream come true.
You have to remember that the father had been missing for a decade, and this is supposed to be the reunion that a lot of the show was leading up to. But the underwhelming presentation of this reunion within the context of the wider show does make sense. You see, there is a lot of story territory that simply goes untouched by Huntik. For one, no one really considers the possibility that the father might simply be dead. We only learn that he has gone missing, and no one entertains any other outcome. In a way, you lose a lot of turmoil that Locke could have had experienced while on this mission. Perhaps he would ponder whether this mission is worth it. Perhaps he would have low points that would indicate any emotional toll on him from this mission. There is also the matter of a paternal figure being missing from a child's life. This is not dissimilar from, for instance, Sokka from The Last Airbender. There are plenty of allusions as to how the lack of their parents shaped Sokka into who he would be. But with Locke, that doesn't happen. In fact, it appears that the parental figures are so inconsequential in Locke's life that he lives alone in a dorm in Venice without any real repercussions of him being without any parent. The show had ample opportunity to discuss how exactly that would affect Locke, but it chooses not to do that. Another missed opportunity is the general lack of moral ambiguity. The first example, again, is Greer. If you thought that Greer was portrayed in any way morally ambiguous or complicated, I would have to disagree. If we return to the 12th episode of Season 1 and have a deeper look at Greer, what he tells you is that he uses his membership in the organization as a means to an end.
Because you lost your father, you joined the organization?
I vowed to come back here someday, too.
Hard to believe Greer joined the organization just for this day.
But the show does not question whether or not joining and serving an organization that seeks the world domination is correct, even if your goal is noble. Same goes for the character of Zalia. She served as a double agent for the organization by infiltrating the Huntik Foundation. Of course, she had quite a tragic backstory and lived under awful circumstances, but she still double-crossed her team. The way the show handles this is through having the team sit down and discuss her backstory. Then the show delivers this conclusion.
It's weird. Now that I know everything Zalia went through, I kind of want to forgive her.
Her life was a hard one at that.
But in the end, she came through for us. I won't forget that.
And that is that on that, I guess. After hearing that, no one says that they sympathize with her. They simply jump to saying that they want to forgive her. They do not give her a second chance at earning back their trust. They give her back the trust. There is no real journey there for the other characters to consider the gravity of the situation. Once again, the script inserts its authoritative hand and steers you towards the conclusion they need you to go towards. And depending on which perspective you want to assume, it is either a lesson in empathy and general positivity towards humans, or it is a lesson in naivete. I do appreciate what they do with Zalia.
Thank you. It means a lot. I've come to say goodbye.
You heard everyone. We forgive you.
But I can't forgive myself.
That right here does show a conflict within her character, which also shows that it isn't always that Huntik steers away from these heavier moments. There is one moment in particular that stands out. It is the moment where Sophie loses her titan, Sabriel.
Do you really think you can stop me?
It was probably one of the darkest moments in the show, and I bet if you asked people who used to watch the show what sticks out to them, this would be one of those moments. I know it was for me. Now, returning to the notion of trust, perhaps the reason why all of this is missing is because, again, the show might not have trusted the viewers to take away the correct things from the show. Instead of choosing to portray any grayness that could be up to interpretation, it chooses a binary that is far easier to control and generalize. That, once again, can also kill discussion instead of fostering it. It is through this approach towards the audience that Huntik chooses that you may say it was forgotten. Unlike Avatar: The Last Airbender, it did not stand out through its writing. It did not depict themes in an unseen or nuanced way. Perhaps that is why it did not have the same range of demographics that Avatar did. On top of that, we also have the matter of animation and the overall age of the TV show that we are discussing today. All of these circumstances that we have covered compound to what seems to be a TV show that is stuck in time, frozen in the past. In In my mind, Huntik used to be the strangest paradox. Whenever I would ask someone about Huntik, no one would seem to remember it. But if it is so easy to forget, why do some people remember it? Why do I remember it? As we have already established, success can be related to how prolific something is. By that logic, if some of us still remember Huntik, it was successful somehow. How? For this video, I would like to highlight two ways of approaching success. The first is through a pragmatic, perhaps even a cynical lens. It is successful if it makes loads of money and loads of buzz, if it maintains its relevance. It does not necessarily matter whether that relevance is in a positive or a negative light either. The second is through, well, an artistic, a more personal lens. You see, you can analyze the show as much as you want in terms of its quality. Hold it up to standards that other TV shows set, not that it is undeserving of such an analysis. After all, Avatar: The Last Airbender holds up against a deeper analysis, while Huntik does not. Bakugan holds up against a comparison in monetary and brand success, while Huntik does not. Considering that all of these TV shows were from the same period, such a critique is valid. But there are certain circumstances under which such analyses do not really matter. There is a matter of intention. Some people might say that intention does not matter when something is published, when something is in the hands of the consumers. The Death of the Author, an essay by Roland Barthes published in 1967, argues specifically against accounting for intention in literary criticism, yet I cannot help but circle back to what the creator of the show has said.
The idea behind the Huntik TV show is to bring back to the kids of today the flavor and the mysteries of the whole legend that make ourselves dream of big adventures when we were kids. Therefore, I thought that there was a space to go and explore all these fantastic adventures and myths and legends.
And from my own experience, I would say that it accomplished just that. That is why I remember it. Where the show succeeds in the plot and the titans is where those feelings of adventure lie. These are the layers that help the show create a world of fantasy, a world of adventure. Sure, it may not have award-winning writing, but it still achieved what it set out to do, and that is admirable. To confirm this, I asked some fans of the show what was the most memorable to them, and what pops up in their minds first when they think about Huntik. The most predominant elements were the titans and the plot. These are exactly the elements that made Huntik stand out. It makes perfect sense as to why people remember it the way they do. And it also aligns with the vision of the creators of the show. Even if it didn't generate a ridiculous amount of buzz and money, it still brought success and value in plenty of other ways. But that is indeed not the title of this video. So, where do these considerations leave us? Even if this video provided critique of the show, such as it being coded specifically towards children or it lacking depth some of its contemporaries might have, you cannot fault the show for being the way it is. I believe that while it is important to analyze and think critically, it is also important to recognize something for what it is supposed to be. At the end of the day, it is a kids' TV show that came out in 2009. It is a product of its time, and it was the right thing at the right moment for some. I know it was for me personally. I still hold it very dear to my heart because of the memories and magic it gave me. It shaped me and probably many others in ways we might not even realize. Some may say it is not as deep, but for some it is. I certainly know it is for me. There still exists a community out there creating their own stories, crafting their own characters. That is the beauty of it. Even if it is not as prolific, it still has some influence, amazing influence at that. So again, where do these considerations leave us? Hopefully with a better appreciation of what Huntik is. There is a trend to come out and say that, oh, something was never that good to begin with. I believe that to be at times disingenuous. One cannot title this show not good. It gave a lot to me personally, and it did what it was expected to do. For me, it is good despite its flaws. You can recognize it as flawed and deem it as valuable at the same time. It is often referred to as the show that no one remembers and a show that people have forgotten. But if you do not mind me asking, is it actually forgotten? I mean, we are here, aren't we?